and welcome to the presentation of the online exhibit, Recalling a Lost World. David Labkovski brings Sholem Aleichem stories to life. My name is Leora Raikin. Thank you, Ari, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for having us back again. I'm the founder and executive director of the David Labkovski Project, and I'm also the great niece of the artist. The David Labkovski Project uses over 400 pieces of art created by my great uncle to educate and engage audiences in Jewish history and the Holocaust. Along with the Director of Education and Exhibit Curator, Stephanie Wolfson, I invite you to step back in time through the words of Sholem Aleichem brought to life by the artist David Labkovski. Thank you, Ari, so much for having us today.
So I'd like to begin by taking a moment with you to look at this piece by David Labkovski. So I'd like you to please write in the chat exactly what you see. So we're looking for actual observations, like I see a paint palette. Really what you observe when you take a minute and look at this piece. And you can write them in the chat, please. There we go. You see warmth. Thank you, Rosalie. A painter with a palette, greeting Sholem Aleichem, two men greeting. A village in the background. A town in the background. Camaraderie of friends. The artist David Labkovski shaking hands with Sholem Aleichem and a village in the background. So there are people with some further information that they're adding in. Present day in the foreground, the past in the background. A young man thanking an artist for his work. Okay. An older man with a palette, looking Jewish, shaking the hand of a man in a three-piece suit. So let's take these observations. And we know that David Labkovski is the artist. So what do you think he is trying to tell us? Just without knowing anything, what do you see in this piece? What do you think he is telling us? Looks like Geraldo Rivera shaking artist's hand. Two friends. So now what do you think he's telling us? What do you think about this piece? I see David Labkovski shaking hands with Sholem Aleichem. David has a palette in his left hand. Thank you, Faith. Life is about to change. You're thinking about possible change that's going to happen. The strong connection between the two men. Bridging generations of Judaism through art. Bridging two worlds. A welcoming feeling. Art and literature going together. David is finally delighted to meet Sholem Aleichem. Two friends. A question, is there a fire in the background? Actually, that will bridge us to our next question I'm going to ask to write in the chat, and you can continue with what you think about the piece, but I'd also like to know now what you wonder about the piece. What questions arise in your mind? So, for example, the one that, is there a fire in the background? What questions do you have? What do you wonder? If you're a teacher, then this would be, I see that there thank you. Yes, and we will go into talking about the artist, but really taking a deep look at art is good for people of all ages, but thank you. If you are a teacher, this routine is the see, think, wonder way of looking at a piece of art. Why is the building tilted? Where is this taking place? So these are super questions that as we go through today, we will begin to answer.
So I loved seeing all those comments, really, really wonderful. We're going to begin by looking at the life of the artist David Labkovski. He was born in 1906. He grew up in Vilna, what's today Vilnius, Lithuania, where many of you have visited. And at 16 years old, he actually participated in the first Jewish art exhibition in Poland. In 1932, he went to the Soviet Union, where he worked as a set painter at the Moscow State Yiddish Theater. And later, he attended the Art Academy in Leningrad. In 1939, when war broke out, he was conscripted into the Red Army.
In 1940, while he was in the army, he was arrested for anti-Soviet behavior and deported to a gulag prison camp in Siberia. Here, we can see through self-portraiture the devastating effect the gulag had on him physically and mentally. Conditions in the gulag were meant to be dehumanizing for the prisoners. People died of starvation, exposure, and disease. And you can see in these pieces how affected he was through his mental state was through the hollow of his eyes and the hauntingness that they portray.
Upon his release from prison in Siberia, David returned to Vilna. And when he returned, he found out the fate of his beloved community. 95% of the Jewish community in Vilna had been murdered and destroyed. Vilna was liberated from the Nazis by the Soviets, and they remained as occupiers until 1991. David lived in fear of rearrest in the Soviet Union for more than a decade before he was allowed and given permission to go and live in Israel. In 1958, he finally goes to live in Israel with his wife, Rivka, and this collection of his work was completed in the years following his time living in Israel. Steph, just unmute. I think it's Stephanie.
She's unmuted, but we can't hear her.
It's weird.
So Stephanie, we can't hear you. We were hearing you before, but we can't hear you now. So I don't know if your microphone got disconnected.
All right, well, let me continue in the meantime. So you started looking at this piece right at the beginning, and we discussed David Labkovski meeting Sholem Aleichem. So what is this all about? Did they know each other? Were they friends? In fact, Sholem Aleichem and David Labkovski never actually met. Sholem Aleichem was born in 1859 and died in 1916. So my uncle was only 10 years old. But they did share many similarities in their lifetime, some trivial, some consequential. Both men were born and lived in small shtetls, little market villages. And then they moved with their families to larger towns. So Sholem Aleichem to Kiev and David Labkovski to Vilna. Both began their trade, or rather their passion, when they were very young. Sholem Aleichem, his writing. David Labkovski always had a paintbrush in his hands, and to him, painting and drawing was like breathing and oxygen. In fact, Sholem Aleichem probably wrote one of his first pieces, which was a story about a list of curses about his stepmother. Obviously, he didn't really like his stepmother that much. But his father noticed this kid was really talented as far as writing is concerned. And his father, Sholem Aleichem's father, also believed in the Haskalah, which was the Enlightenment movement, and sent him to a secular school for a formal education. Both artists lived in extreme poverty, but neither allowed their financial situation to influence or deter them in their passion. And both men had a student-tutor relationship. Sholem Aleichem married his student, and David Labkovski married my aunt Rivka, who was his tutor. Both men died very far away from their birthplace, David Labkovski in Israel and Sholem Aleichem in New York, where over 100,000 people attended his funeral, indicating their love and connection for the stories that he shared. Steph, is your mic connected?
Okay, what if I do that? Can you hear me now?
Perfect,
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so let's take a step back and meet our author, his audience, and of course his stories. Sholem Aleichem literally means peace be upon you, or colloquially, how do you do? It was the pen name chosen by Solomon Rabinovich. Rabinovich chose to write for the Jewish common man in Yiddish, their mother tongue. Originally, he took the pen name because he did not want to disappoint his father, who would have preferred his son write in a more formal language of Russian or Hebrew. Rabinovich grew up in the Pale of Settlement, which is the area of Western Russia or Eastern Europe where the Jewish population was permitted to live under Russian law. It began with Catherine the Great in 1791 and continued until 1917. This area includes areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania. And it's that general vicinity. At the turn of the 20th century, approximately 95% of the 5.3 million Jews living in Russia lived in this area of the Pale of Settlement. As a child, Rabinovich suffered many hardships familiar to the Jews in the Pale of Settlement, including his family's impoverishment, the passing of his mother from cholera, and his father's second marriage to a woman who, as we heard, young Rabinovich disliked. Later, even though he was popular as a writer, he suffered from financial hardship. He lost a fortune, which he inherited from his wealthy father-in-law, in stock speculations. His stories are often feature autobiographical details and plots. Listen for them as we discuss the stories.
So during Tsar Alexander's second reign, there was some hope that the enforcement of the Pale of Settlements would diminish. However, in 1881, after Tsar Alexander II was assassinated, the Jews were, surprise, surprise, blamed for his death. And this resulted in widespread pogroms and the creation of the discriminatory May laws. And these laws prohibited any Jewish settlement outside of the Pale of Settlements. The laws also gave peasants the right to expel Jews from their towns. Now, this wave of pogroms was formal, state-sponsored anti-Semitism, and it thwarted any hopes of emancipation. And it also resulted in a huge wave, a sprawling wave of immigration, with millions of Jews leaving the Pale of Settlements and going to live in both North America, South America, the UK, South Africa, Canada, and what was then known as Palestine, today Israel. So if we go to the next slide, we see the setting for Sholem Aleichem's fictional village, the average kind of village that you would imagine Jews came from and where Jews lived. And this fictional name for the city, and I just want to see if anyone wants to write in the chat, if anyone knows the name of Sholem Aleichem's fictional village. So this was called Kastrelevka, and this was the fictional village that Sholem Aleichem came up with. And this is where the cast of characters from our exhibit and from the stories originate.
So if you look at this painting, and we'll just do this for a moment, tell me what you notice about it. What do you think David Labkovski was feeling when he painted this fictional shtetl of Kasserolevka? What do you think he was feeling? What are the things you notice about this piece? It's distorted, instability, off-kiltered. It reminds you of Chagall, nostalgia, colorful, absolutely. All of these things are, it's not solid. So what I'm going to, and you see all this unstable village, thank you. This is the clue, like ready to collapse, mud roads. So we are going to say that maybe those things are fairy tale qualities, that he is letting us know this is a fictional town through the way that his use of line and color and curve of the streets and of the houses. And in the town of the little people, one of Sholem Aleichem's stories, he even writes, "Shall I call it a beautiful little town? From a distance, it looks, how shall I say it? Like a loaf of bread, thickly studded with poppy seeds. Some of the houses are built on the slope of a hill, and the rest are huddled at the base, one on top of the other. There are no streets to speak of because the houses are not built according to a plan. And besides, where's there room for such a thing?"
So how does Sholem Aleichem's words affect your thoughts on this piece? Now we've seen the piece, we've heard the words. What kind of emotions, what kind of thoughts are coming to you that you would write in the chat?
So Jennifer writes closeness and community. Thank you, Jennifer. It looks like a patchwork. Real, earthy, not ashamed, reality.
And I love that word patchwork, because I don't think, you went to the planning commission or the, urban planning and sort of had this master plan designed. That's a wonderful way of describing it.
Endearment.
Together.
Yeah, sorry, whimsical. It looks happy even though the buildings appear to be unstable.
People have asked, can you spell the name of the fictional town in the chat so we can see how it's spelled?
Sure. Hold on. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Lainey. Okay.
So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to zoom into one of my uncle's paintings, and we're going to start meeting some of Sholem Aleichen's characters. And we're going to go through the artwork, and then Stephanie's going to actually take you through the online exhibit. But what do we see? What is happening in this picture? What is the situation that is going on? What are the characters? And what is it that you think that they are doing in this picture?
The mother is cleaning her son's face.
So in this tale, which is known as the Purim dinner, we meet a young boy who we can all relate to. His mother wants to clean his nose the whole time.
So Sholem Aleichem writes, "So long as my nose was called a nose, I could put up with it. But since it became to my mother a nose, and she took to putting it right, life became unbearable for my poor nose. I don't know what sin my nose, more than any other part of my body, had committed to turn my mother into its bitter enemy. It seemed to me it was a nose like all other noses, a bit reddish, a bit tilted, and sometimes a bit damp."
So when we look at these illustrations and we listen to the stories and we read the stories and then we see my uncle's illustrations, we see both the human interaction and how similar those interactions are today. So we see the timelessness, but we also see the importance of animals to everyday life in the shtetl. There's often a goat. There may be horses, cows, goats, chickens, ducks, and these all provided a way not only to sustain a family, but also to earn a living. And Sholem Aleichem writes about the importance of animals. In the pot, he writes about Yenta, who deals in eggs.
And she says, Rabbi, a question's what I want to ask you. I don't know if you know me or if you don't know me. Yenta's who I am, Yenta the dairy vendor. I deal in eggs, see, and also geese, hens, and ducks. I have steady customers. May God give them health and long life, because if they didn't support me, I couldn't buy the bread to make a prayer over. So again, we see the benefit of animals, and this time a goat, which you can see here. In The Enchanted Tailor, we read about a woman's desire to own a goat. The tales that Sholem Aleichem weaves and David Labkovski illustrates do share such humanity, these moments we can not just intellectually relate to, but also feel so deeply. And I think you'll see in this little clip from one of Sholem Aleichem, from The Enchanted Tailor, that we have, so many of us have felt exactly what this woman feels, maybe with a different outcome. But she says, the devil with it. I'm sick and tired of it. Day after day after day, I break my head trying to think what to cook for dinner. You need the brains of a prime minister to think of something new. If there's a goat in the house, you can have a glass of milk for the children. You can cook porridge with milk. You can make a milk soup for dinner, noodles and milk for supper. And besides, you can count on a pitcher of sour cream, a piece of cheese, a bit of butter. Think of it, if we only had a goat.
So, Steph, okay, I was going to say, before we show the next slide, there's one very, very famous Sholem Aleichem character. And I want to see if anyone knows who that character is and if they'd like to write it in the chat.
Well, we can show the picture and maybe it'll be a clue.
Okay.
Yes, we're seeing Natalie got it right off. Tevye. Tevye, the milkman. Tevye. Yes, Tevye.
So possibly the most beloved of all Sholem Aleichem's characters is Tevye. And Tevye's trials and tribulations still connect today to audiences around the world. Now, Tevye is the inspiration for what famous musical? Who's going to get it first?
Natalie got it right off. Fiddler on the Roof.
Very good, Natalie. Very good. So the inspiration for Fiddler on the Roof and the stories of Tevye are both tragic and funny. And they're told in the classic Sholem Aleichem style. They whine, they twist, and they take the reader on this journey. In the first part of Tevye's stories, Tevye strikes it rich. We find Tevye telling no one other than the author, Sholem Aleichem, about how he became a dairyman. Tevye began as a log hauler, but after finding two lost women in the woods and returning them to their home, he is rewarded with money, food, and a dairy cow.
Sholem Aleichem writes, if you're destined to draw the winning ticket in a lottery, Mr. Sholem Aleichem, it'll come right into your home without you asking for it. As King David says, it never rains, but it pours. For how else should I happen to be selling cheese and butter all of a sudden? Take my word for it, the story is worth hearing. I'll sit down for a little while here, near you on the grass. Let the horse do a little nibbling meanwhile. After all, even a horse is one of God's living creatures.
So here we find Mottel, the cantor's son. And again, we find tragedy with humor, very relatable to audiences then and even audiences today. Financial hardship strikes the family when Mottl's father dies, and his older brother sees an advertisement for a book that is sure to make you millions. And of course, he uses his last ruble for a copy of this book.
He says, for 1 ruble, 100 rubles. Any one of you can earn 100 rubles a month and more. All you have to do is read our book, costing a mere ruble plus postage. Hurry, buy, stop what you're doing, and take advantage of this great opportunity, or you will miss out. So the brothers have these misadventures that are found in this story. And here we see Motl selling kvass, a carbonated beverage. And as he gives away free glasses to his friends, he refills the pitcher with water. On one such occasion, he refills with laundry soapy water instead of fresh. And people start to complain, of course, it doesn't taste good. So there's a ruckus starting in town, and a Russian police officer interferes. And Motl says, it's not mine, it's my brother's drink. Such a typical sibling response. And Natalie even said the themes of his story are so universal. You don't have to be Jewish to understand the situation and the wishes and the hopes. And here we can see that. I mean, such a modern, I have 4 children and I can hear them saying, it wasn't me, it was my brother. But the Jewish people who were complaining a minute ago about this horrible tasting drink that he's selling, in the face of this Russian police officer, change their tune. And they come to Motl's assistance in Yiddish and in Hebrew. They start to say to him, what are you doing pointing the finger to this Russian police officer at your older brother? So you can think about what that tells you about the tensions that were going on in society at the time between the Jewish people and the Russian police. So one man in Yiddish says to him, you know, run away, get your hand loose, run away and go home, which is exactly what Motl does. He runs straight into his mother's arms. And of course, the next chapter is their next scheme, which is making ink. Also, a great misadventure happens for Motl and his brother. And today, the last character we're going to really look at today is Menachem Mendel. He and Motl and Tevye are the 3 most beloved of Sholem Aleichem's characters and the most well-known. Menachem Mendel, as we said about the autobiographical part of Sholem Aleichem, is he leaves the shtetl to make his fortune in stocks and bonds, with his wife, which his wife Shana Shendel refers to as stockings and bands. And you can see here, it's a collection of letters. And the letters between this couple, Menachem Mendel and Shana Shendel, going back and forth, give us a glimpse into their personal lives, but also the dynamics of migration, not just overseas, but even to the big city. So Menachem Mendel moves from city to city, trying to make a living. And Shana Shendel's at home trying to keep her family together. And she wants him to come home. These letters were published in installments between 1892 and 1904 in various periodicals. And the final version was published in an anniversary edition of Collected Works in Warsaw in 1909. And if you notice the last line of this part of the letter, first, as you read it, you can see that there also that the richness of Yiddish, even in translation, when we talked about curses, how she, all my enemies like the Pharaoh. I mean, all these things that she, in her complaints, the way that the Yiddish was as this mother tongue. But at the end, she says, what does my angel or breadwinner do? He dreams a new dream. So we see this tension of the dreams and hopes of the future that required migration. And we can see that they did go from city to city, but also across oceans. And it was a people looking for a better life.
So what is the key to understanding Labkovski's art in relation to Sholem Aleichem stories? And Sholem Aleichem stories shed light on the everyday life that existed for Jews before the Holocaust, everyday life in Eastern Europe. And David Labkovski's paintbrush was guided by Sholem Aleichen's tales. Reading and illustrating Sholem Aleichem stories was for my Uncle David a return to his childhood in Vilna, to the people, to his past, even if just for a moment. And in Vilna, there were approximately 58,000 Jewish residents before the Holocaust. There were over 100 synagogues and prayer halls. We see this was the home of the Great Synagogue of Vilna, as depicted in Labkovski's work. And this was really the epicenter of Jewish life in Eastern Europe, often known as the Jerusalem of Lithuania. This was where the greatest scholars lived in Vilna.
So this piece was created in 1979, representing life in 1929. And this is not an illustration of Sholem Aleichem. It's actually a piece of David Labkovski's childhood in the interwar period. And it is alive with the comings and goings of the everyday. And just as Sholem Aleichem wrote himself into many of the stories as a character, David Labkovski does the same thing in his artwork with self-portraiture. Here he is, part of this vibrant scene, and you can see him in that lower left corner, and there's a detail for you to get a closer look. There he is carrying a canvas. And if we really take a close look at some of these characters, they are so similar to the illustrations of Sholem Aleichem's characters. So for example, notice the figure of the woman on the balcony on that left. She's here in interwar Vilna, she's wiping her son's nose, just as we saw in the Purim dinner. And here we see a group of people chatting, just like they were in the Enchanted Tailor, talking about the goat.
So Labkovski gives us many clues as to what the past was like. Even clearer clues when we look at the Great Synagogue of Vilna. We look at it in the interwar years and we compare it to the illustrations of Kostrolevka. But we always see the Great Synagogue in the background of both, representing the importance and the center corners of the Great Synagogue and religion in everyday life.
So here we see it again, but this time in the destruction of the physical city. Here it is, which was indeed damaged during the Holocaust, but it still stood. And the surviving Jewish community of Vilna pleaded with the Soviets to repair the roof and the windows and let the Great Synagogue stand again. But they refused and actually razed the building and built a school on the site of the Great Synagogue that continued to run as a school until about 3 years ago. And now they're doing excavations on the site they know where everything was, so it's really just uncovering. And they've done a lot with the courtyard and where the mikveh was already. So it is still, this site is still a modern issue and a current process in Vilna. And lastly, David Labkovski moves the characters in time and place. They were so real to him, as we could see how he crossed the characters in his own life and in the illustrations of the story. He moves them in time and place, and he puts the characters under Nazi occupation and being forced into the Vilna ghetto. There's Tevye, and you can notice the young girl with the star. David Labkovski's mission in life was to document the past, to bear witness to his community. Sholem Aleichem's stories let him step back into his childhood, into the world that was. They became his muse and a tool for him to work through the past. So you can remember, again, that first painting or the first drawing that we looked at. And we're going to ask you to write in the chat now that you know the key to Labkovski. What do you notice about this? What do you see now that you didn't maybe see before? What do you notice now that you didn't notice before? It's like they were partners, absolutely. And we know they never met, right there. So it's Sholem is thanking him for a job well done. That's beautiful. Thank you, Aviva. The Great Synagogue. Behind Sholem Aleichem is the Great Synagogue of Vilna. Sholem, who is older, looks younger than David Labkovski, Leora's uncle. The gratitude and appreciation for his artwork. The artist is grateful to Sholem Aleichem for his ideas. These are wonderful. David,
wonderful.
David looking into Sholem Aleichem's eyes. I understand what you were saying in your work. Oh, that's really beautiful. Thank you, Joanne.
Ari, I must ask, is there a way I can keep these comments or you can send them to me?
Yeah, I'm keeping track, and I will
These are just
download them. So
amazing. Really, really beautiful comments. So in 1959, a year after David and Rivka were given permission to come and live in Israel, he created the Sholem Aleichem and his Heroes series. And this was printed to coincide with the 100th anniversary of Sholem Aleichem birth. And this was part of David Labkovski's first exhibit in Israel in 1959. And here you can see my uncle with one of his favorite pieces with Sholem Aleichem characters that he painted.
Okay, so now we hope you enjoyed the presentation. It was just a preview of the exhibit. So the exhibit is full of stories and audio to accompany the artwork. Are there any questions before we enter the online exhibit? I saw one about when David Labkovski was released from the Gulag, and it was in 45, but it was not really related to the end of World War II. He had completed his sentence. So the Gulag, you were sentenced to a time, and David Labkovski was released at the end of his sentence.
How successful was this series in Israel? Did people appreciate this artwork and this 1959 when he released it?
So that's a great question. Critically, from an artistic perspective, it was critically well reviewed, very positively reviewed. From an emotional perspective, Israel society at that point in 1959 really wanted to move forward and not look back. And not only not look back, but there was also sort of a hesitancy and not really understanding why more Jews had not left before the Holocaust. So there was almost like a lack of desire to embrace this cultural life that had existed.
I'm going to go back. Hold on. The books here with the prints ended up being reprinted a number of times, however. So they were well received eventually. And a museum of his work did open in Ramat Gan in the 1980s. So now what I'm going to do is link to show you how to tour the exhibit online. So there are a couple things that you can note. One is that the stories, abridged version of the stories are online. So you can click to the stories and it will take you to where you can either view a PDF or, like I said, to an online storybook that you can actually turn the pages. It's really neat. And the exhibit is also on on the David Labkovski webpage. When you enter the exhibit, you can either go to a tour or you can just enter, and it will take you to the beginning. And it's such a simple thing to navigate. The eye will have some more information. You can navigate just by clicking the forward buttons, and it will take you through the whole story and of Sholem Aleichem, of David Labkovski, of how they're connected through Levka. So here, I'll get to one where you can see the pieces that we've shown you. There's
people. None of them are gloomy.
Can you hear?
None of them are worried little men of affairs. But on the contrary, they are known everywhere as jesters, storytellers, a cheerful, light-hearted breed of men. Poor, but cheerful. It is hard to say what makes them so happy. Nothing. Just sheer joy of living. If you ask them, how do you live? They will answer with a shrug and a laugh. How do we live? Who knows? We live.
So as you can see, there's an audio component. I'm sorry about the phone ringing. There's an audio component to the exhibit as well. And there are other stories beyond what we shared in today's presentation. So please, take your time on your own and go to the exhibit. I want to hold on a second. Now I want to get us back to the presentation. Okay. Oh, what are you all seeing? Are you still in the exhibit?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, hold on. Give me 1 second. There we go. Okay.
So what Stephanie and I have done is created an educational curriculum that uses the over 400 pieces of art that were drawn by my great uncle David Labkovski. And we've segmented these into 2 programs. One, documenting history through art, which documents life before, during, and after the Holocaust, as well as his time as a prisoner in Siberia. And 2, a Sholem Aleichem component. And in each of these components, we educate the students through the art, being able to critically read the art within the historical context and the personal narrative of the artist. So we were so excited. We actually had our first in-person session a few weeks ago. Students from San Diego San Diego Jewish School came down to LA, and they got to interact with the art and also act out some of the stories. And it was this real merger of art and literature, but at the same time, empowerment and allowing the students to educate and to teach their peers. And this has been a very popular program with middle school students, 6th grade and 8th grade, and really fusing literature and art. But all our programs use the art as its foundation, and they are scalable to middle school, high school, college, and adult level. And one of our most exciting programs is actually our International Student Docent Training Program, which is for middle and high school students, really across the whole country. There is no cost to apply and to be part of this program. And students learn to become a docent of Labkovski's art so that they can educate their peers. And it's really been amazing to see the friendships and the relationships that form along with the investment and connection that these students develop towards the art as well as the subject matter. So we've been fortunate to take this to Lithuania, to Mexico City. So the program is also in Spanish, as well as South Africa and different parts of the United States.
So Natalie actually is asking, is there a local exhibit of this artwork? So it shows at different places. It's a traveling exhibit. So JCCs, universities, other organizations, synagogues can bring the exhibit to communities, as Leora just said, across the world. But we do have some upcoming programs. The Sholem Aleichem exhibit is online, and there is also an online version of documenting history through art that you can see a little bit more of David's story through his artwork as well, both on the David Labkovski Project website. And thank you, Deb.
We encourage you, if you are part of a temple, if you are part of an organization or know of a JCC, this exhibit travels everywhere. Stephanie and I often travel along with the exhibit and then give different educational programs for adults and students and multi-generational components. One of our favorite programs is actually an art and poetry in response to Labkovski's art, which is really a wonderful way to engage in a very tangible manner with the art. So probably the best way to find out about our programs is sign up for the newsletter, because then we will share all the upcoming programs with you, and most of them are free.
Do you have time for a few quick questions about the art?
Sure.
So, thank you for the presentation, and thank you. I'll share the website and so people can take the tour based on today's program. But how large were Labkovski's paintings? We see people in the images here holding up reprints. Are those the actual sizes, or are they smaller than they really were?
So, and that's a great question. So some are
Can we unshare the screen? Sorry, so we could just.
I have one more. We have one more.
Oh, okay.
So let me share that, because we have a new opportunity that we're trying for the first time today, which is to take some time as you go through the exhibit. So if you want to take a screenshot of this slide, and we can put the questions in the chat, to go through the exhibit, to answer these 4 questions, and the first 3 people who answer all 4 correctly will win some wonderful prizes that will be mailed to you. So send the answers with your name, your email, that we'll get with the email, and your address to info@David Labkovski Project. And we will send the first 3 people who answer the 4 questions correctly some prizes.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, so to go back to the question, how large were the canvases?
So some are as large as 6 feet by 4 feet. Some are really, really large, and some are as small as this. He literally painted on whatever he could. So whether it was burlap, sometimes he painted on both sides of the painting. But when we're traveling with the program, we recreated them and duplicated them in a lithograph. So they're very easy to transport. And when we bring them into a setting, obviously we can't bring the originals. So we bring the reproduction, and we really want people to look at it in a way where Stephanie has sort of guided people through how to look at art. In some of our college programs, actually, students select at the start of the program, the start of the semester, one piece that resonates with them the most, and they take it back to their college room. And it's quite amazing when you watch their evolvement of their connection with that piece, from seeing things very superficially at the start to coming to us each time and saying, I saw this, I've never seen this. I showed it to my roommate and they had this comment to make. And Stephanie and I also, from the students, learned to see things that we hadn't seen before.
So people have asked, Leora, if you met your uncle.
So I was very close to my uncle and my aunt. My grandfather immigrated to South Africa in 1927. And Rivka, his sister, and her husband, David, were his only surviving relatives. And David and Rivka never had any children of their own. My mom and her siblings were like Rivka and David's children, and myself and my siblings and cousins were like their grandchildren. So they had a very strong interest in everything that we were doing. They were both very eager to give advice, and whenever we went to Israel, we would spend time with them, and then they would come out to South Africa for 2-3 months at a time and stay with us and my cousins. So it was a lot more than just a niece or a distant relative. And David's paintings were always a part of my life.
So if you wanted to see the originals, can you still see the ones that are in the exhibit? Are they available to see in Ramat Gan or other places?
So both. There is a museum of his work in Israel, in Ramat Gan, and the over 100 originals are in Los Angeles. And Ari, if you ever wanted to make a time for a Community Scholars Program to come to the Valley, we would be very happy to show you and take you around the originals. And it is it's always different being with the originals, and a very, very special experience. We've even got like trays and sacks of burlap that he painted on and that we framed. And one of the things that we've done, that Stephanie initiated about 2 years ago, we wanted to take this whole learning art process a step further. And so Stephanie selected 2 images, one of the Vilna Center Marketplace and one of the home in which my grandfather grew up in. And together with a student from USC, we've developed a virtual reality component that you can literally step into the artwork and meet and interact with the characters, wearing Oculus glasses, using a wand in your hand, lighting Shabbat candles. And it's this incredible 15-minute, very immersive experience. And if you wanted, we could also, do that with some of your group members, along with the original art. But it's really this layer upon layer of learning that the David Labkovski Project is all about.
Where are you guys in the Valley? Which area?
Woodland Hills area.
Okay. And then just 1 or 2 last questions. Has his art in Israel, has it kind of been re-noticed in a way? Is it still unnoticed, underappreciated, or is it appreciated? Where does it stand today?
So also wonderful question. What happened after his death in 1991, a very complicated, lengthy court case took place involving his art. The court case lasted 22 years, that basically his art was taken away from society, and many of the pieces and the gallery was looted. Many of the pieces were stolen. And then when the courts did get involved, the art got locked up in a lockbox. So aside from the educational component, we see it as our obligation to share and to show this artwork. And we're doing that in America, and we want to do more of that in Israel.
But I guess my question is there a greater appreciation for his art today in Israel than maybe when he was alive, which happens to some artists?
I don't. I think we've still got a lot of work to do to get people to recognize him. Just to give like a sideway, in 1987, he donated 100 pieces to a museum in Ramat Gan, which was called the David Labkovski Museum of Jewish Art. Stephanie went to visit it several years ago, and unfortunately only maybe 7 of the 100 pieces were on display, and the rest very badly maintained in a cage in the basement. So there are a lot of unfinished pieces and threads. And we're also discovering more of his art in different places. We just found out that Yad Vashem actually has 5 of these pieces, but we'd love to have an exhibit of his work in Israel and really get him recognized as an artist like he should. The Israel Consul General in Los Angeles is very supportive of what we're doing and is very aware of our program here.
And Yad Vashem does recognize that there is the narrative in his pieces. One of the pieces about resistance in the Vilna ghetto is on their website as part of an exhibit that they have on Vilna. So there is this, this trickle of recognition in Vilna also. There's a piece on display at the Vilna Gaon State Museum. So his work is shown, but it is not regarded as highly as it should for the narrative that it shares and tells with the human toll of history.
Is the book, the Sholem Aleichem book, still available? Is it in print if people wanted to buy it?
So we're gonna make it in print again. It's not in print at the moment. We've got our own book documenting history through art, which we've created, which is available on our website. And very much we found that how we've grown this program is really through people's personal connections, whether it's to a museum and somebody saying, I went to this lecture, I heard about this artist, and really making those connections. But yeah, there's a lot of work still to do. It's such an important part of history, and it's such an important way of sharing and educating about history through this body of artwork. We reckon there could be up to 1,000 pieces that are out there.
Wow, okay. So if you happen to have a David Labkovski in your house, please tell me. But if you, well, hopefully you don't, I guess, but if you do, maybe you don't know that you have one in your house. Yeah. And you could help us get them back to where they should go. So I think we're out of time, but I do want to encourage everybody to go to the website, davidlabkovskiproject.org, and visit the Recalling a Lost World project that we just went through, and enjoy it at your own time. I want to thank Alida for making the initial introduction to Leora over 3 years ago. Thank you, Alida. Thank you, Leora, for the great work, and Stephanie, keep it up. And what's exciting about what you're doing is not only educating the older community, older part of our community, but working with middle school and high school and college age is terrific, and turning them into educators. Nothing better than that. That's the best way to teach and to learn. So thank you, everybody. And yeah, maybe we'll go come visit you in the valley, but not till it gets cooler, because
don't blame you. Thank you, Ari, and thank you, Alida. And we're really honored to be part of this amazing program, Ari, that you initiated and founded. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Keep safe,
Bye.
Keep cool, and we'll see you in Riga on Tuesday. Okay. Don't forget your passports. Bye-bye.